In the previous section, before we started talking about the corporate world, Professor, you mentioned some suggestions for improving work performances with sub-skills for undertaking tasks. Isn't finishing a task a skill in itself? What are these sub-skills? Can you please elaborate on what you meant?
Yes, of course. But, before we supplement the indicators of poor performance with certain general suggestions, let us try to compartmentalize these suggestions in the form of certain sub-skills. Let us get a core understanding of why sub-skills are essentially required in an organization, and what these are. Sub-skills are the ability to undertake tasks, and they are comprehension, efficiency, effectiveness, innate enthusiasm for work, effective reading through writing, identifying trade-offs at work, documentation, and understanding corporate hierarchy.
Did I hear you say comprehension? Doesn't that just mean understanding a text? That's pretty basic, isn't it? How does that help at all? Don't we all have a basic sense of comprehension?
You are absolutely right. Comprehension is basically the skill to understand and read texts with intellect. It elaborates upon the idea that there exists a certain component of our intelligence that separates cursory reading from in-depth or effective reading. The importance of comprehension is immense because it will allow you to distinguish between the various intricacies of the material that you receive to work with. Comprehension is the most basic skill, and you must aim to be a master comprehender, because comprehending material well is the very first step to understand and ultimately work according to what is expected out of you. If you understand things properly and you have clarity of orders, you will be protected from the problems that come with ambiguity and confusion. Comprehension is not only essential during the first stages of scouting a job, but it is also essential as we proceed working with the organization. Let us start with an exercise that allows us to understand the importance of comprehension while initially looking for jobs. This exercise will measure how well you are able to understand the nuances of job advertisements and how well you can tailor your responses to be successful at obtaining the said jobs. I would like to ask the invigilator to join in and explain this exercise further.
Let's do a quick quiz to understand what we have learned so far. Here are a few questions, let's see if you can get the right answer.
Thank you for that small activity. I know I had to think hard to figure out the answers. Now that we have worked with this exercise referring to comprehension for a specific purpose, we know its importance more clearly. But Professor, if someone has trouble with such comprehension, what can they do?
The good thing is that, like every other skill, people can work on this too. They can always improve themselves. The first thing they can do is preview the source material initially and give it a cursory reading. Before reading it for analysis, make sure to go through its contents in advance, even if you do not plan to go in depth. For the purpose of analysis, you should be reading the text for the second or third time, so that you are not completely lost with the source material. Some of the questions that you can ask yourself after this cursory reading are, what is the material about and what is it trying to communicate to me? What steps is it expecting me to take? What is the problem statement for this? Then, you need to break down the text. Understand the issues you are encountering mid-text by marking them in the source material itself. Go through them the third time while going through the text. The material which you can understand immediately should be gone through first and kept aside, and once the difficult parts are understood, both sections can be co-opted to understand the material comprehensively. Next, you need to understand the main idea of the text. This is the most important step. In case you are looking at a list of numbers, understand the context of these numbers and what they are essentially referring to. The main idea of a general text refers to the most important fact or concept the text is trying to convey. This is developed after careful analysis of the material. Lastly, wrap up. Summarize the main ideas of the text or the material you are going through. This can be done in pointers or paragraphs. It needs to be done in a crisp manner so that it is easily understandable.
So basically we need to give it a reading, break it down, get the gist, analyze it, and then wrap it up.
That is absolutely correct.
Can you perhaps please give a real-life example for this? How can we do this in our respective workplaces?
To give you an example, if you have to summarize a document of the minutes of a meeting, you first give it a cursory read to understand the main idea and objective of the meeting, who was presiding over it, and so on. In case you do not understand certain concepts that were addressed in the meeting, put them aside, mark them with a pencil, and first focus on understanding the simpler concepts. Read the complex concepts later on and understand them individually first and then in the context of the whole meeting. Then you understand the main reasons for holding the meeting. After comprehension, we come to efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency principle dictates whether you can complete the task within a stipulated period. This is a time-based principle which does not take into consideration the quality of the end product, and the quantity produced, rather only takes into consideration whether the task has been completed and the deadline has been reached. The principle of effectiveness dictates whether you can complete the task by producing a good quality product or more quantity of the given product. This is a purely quantitative goal and does not take into consideration any time-based goal or objective. You need to understand the importance of intellectual stimulation and its involvement in the development of their expertise. Emphasize on efficiency and effectiveness as important scientific principles which ought to be followed for sure-shot success. This consciousness is beneficial to inculcate willingness to learn in individuals.
So while comprehension was about understanding the task, efficiency and effectiveness is about doing the task. A task needs to be completed effectively and efficiently, right, Professor? But these are also skills that need to be inculcated. If I talk about myself, I always finish my work in a given amount of time, but the quality may be compromised. This means I am efficient. But how can I also become effective? These two, if done together, can produce the best outcomes. But if I struggle with it, I'm sure there are others who struggle with it too.
Efficiency and effectiveness are complex terms which can be understood and adapted by following certain steps. You can adapt these steps to your everyday life in order to develop them further so that they can translate to the workplace. It is not possible for you to do everything in the organization. In fact, there is a massive possibility that as you start working with bigger, more expansive organizations, you would probably not be able to do everything in your own department itself. This is why to showcase your capacity and capability to work to the maximum, you have to prioritize the tasks that you are planning to take up in the organization. This prioritization does not only include prioritization of performance-based tasks but also tasks that you would pursue for self-care. For instance, you choose to relax and unwind with a book instead of working. That is also a form of prioritization. It is very important for you to maintain a schedule of the activities, whether professional or recreational, that you do through the course of the day, in order to be more efficient. This aids in the aforementioned prioritization of tasks, but in addition to that, it allows smooth and stress-free functioning of individuals. If you follow a pre-prepared plan, you will be less likely to deviate and more likely to achieve your goals. Scheduling is a great way to avoid procrastination. Take out time for yourself. This is an extremely important step for an individual, because a lot of people believe that striking a work-life balance does not essentially enhance productivity, rather it might displace it. However, that is not true. If you take out time for yourself to rejuvenate as a matter of norm, you end up ensuring you are up to date with self-care and you ensure that you look forward to working after you have taken proper rest. Taking out time for hobbies is also extremely beneficial. Maintain a neat workplace. A clean and ordered workplace is very important. Clutter with its physical manifestation is often reflected in an employee's work ethic and shows a lack of discipline and organization. This is why you should maintain a decluttered workplace so as to allow you to work more efficiently. Communicate freely in the organization. If you do not communicate freely in the organization, the clarity that you require with regard to your responsibilities as well as insights, recommendations and suggestions, would not come about. Furthermore, your ability to give opinions would also be compromised if you are unable to communicate. Example, you can collaborate with your colleague to prepare a marketing or sales doc and receive their comments on your ideas. Say no to tasks you cannot do. This seems like a fairly simple concept, but due to hierarchies and power dynamics, it becomes very difficult for freshers to say no to managers when it comes to work and other requests. However, for the sake of your own comfort and ability, say no if you cannot affirmatively perform the task.
Professor, again, If I speak for myself, I'm often afraid of saying no to work because of the fear of offending my seniors. What if they feel that I'm incompetent, and that's why I'm refusing to take on work?
Most congenial superiors would really appreciate it if you were honest about your work and your capability and capacity to work, provided you fulfill the responsibilities you are willing to take up to the best of your ability. Now, in this case, the most important thing is, how does an employee say no to a task without offending their boss? The employee can say no to the boss by providing them with requisite reasons as to why they cannot perform the task. The employee can be honest yet polite, and that comes off as highly admirable for young employees.
That does make sense. Doesn't it also come under free communication? Expressing one's needs is also part of communication, and so is saying no to a task?
Yes, it is. Besides giving your opinion on things, you can express your needs and requests as well. It will harbor a positive work environment. Now, we come to identifying trade-offs at work.
Professor, trade-offs at work are something we often face. One major trade-off I have faced is money versus time.
The trade-offs I am mentioning are broad categories which you as an employee across all levels can potentially encounter. However, the extent to which every trade-off applies differs in the level of seniority and roles. You mentioned the money versus time trade-off between the amount of money you can earn and the amount of time you have to devote to work. If you start earning a greater salary, you would have to devote more time to work and you will have less time for recreation and to give to your family. Another one can be position versus accountability. The more prestigious your position in the organization, the more accountability you end up having for the kind of tasks you and your team performs and the tangible you end up delivering. If you want a position in which you are not held majorly accountable, you have to settle for a lower position in the organization. Job security versus opportunity is a very common trade-off people face. To take on more opportunities for growth and success, you have to take on more risks. Hence, your job at all times may not be as secure with stable earnings. In this case, for a secure job, you have to settle for lesser opportunities. Lastly, there is relationships versus numbers. In a job, you have to see whether you value your relationship with the client more or the client's performance on paper and in numbers. This is a major trade-off as this can massively change your dynamic with the client.
Now that I think about it, these are some very serious trade-offs where each option looks just as good as the other. If I talk about the job security versus opportunity trade-off, both of them look so important that I would really be confused while choosing them. While we constantly strive to find new opportunities, job security seems equally important. Is there ever a right choice between the two? How do people even make a decision here?
In a work setting, you are faced with these trade-offs very often. Choosing them is never easy, but there are some things you can do to see which option is right for you. Try to reframe the situation, and try to place it in a different context to determine whether the trade-offs continue to exist. Try and negotiate options as much as possible. Also, try to negotiate the methods of accomplishing a single option as well. Trade-offs in terms of career choices or transition may happen due to false expectations as well. Contribute energies efficiently and prioritize tasks from the very beginning itself to prevent last-minute confusions and problems with choice. Accept current realities and proceed to resolve them immediately, rather than delaying work and tasks because outcomes are not appropriate.
I try to avoid these trade-offs, but I'm glad I know how to tackle them if I face them now. What are we talking about next, Professor?
We'll be shedding some light on the innate enthusiasm for a job.
Oh. I do mean not to sound unenthusiastic here, but Professor, whenever I start a new job, I'm so nervous that I doubt if I can show my enthusiasm very well. For example, being enthusiastic in a job interview would be difficult for me because I'll be worrying about how the interview would go. Just a thought of being nervous stops me from being enthusiastic and makes me stiff and serious.
According to some sources, the enthusiasm you display on a job interview can be the difference between getting the job and not getting the job. Some even say that attitude can account for up more than 40% of your rating. This activity will focus on the different attitudes that can be displayed during a job interview. In a job interview, enthusiasm comes across as showing a genuine interest in the job.
So if I don't have that innate enthusiasm, would that work against me?
It may. It may cause the interviewer to choose others over you.
What can I do about that? This way I'll keep losing out on opportunities because I'm not naturally enthusiastic. I don't understand how it can be done.
Calm down, calm down. I told you a while back that every skill can be inculcated. Inculcating enthusiasm for a task that you are inherently not interested in pursuing can be extremely hard. However, here are some of the steps that you can potentially take to transform your outlook to achieve the task, even if you are unable to find it interesting or motivating enough. The first thing you need to do is understand the crux of the task. Gauge the task appropriately before making a decision with regard to it. View it as steps and see if the steps interest you and inspire you to pursue it. For instance, you may not be interested in designing a campaign for a product you are not passionate about, but through this project, you may get to meet people, design artistic material, etc. And that may prove to be worth your time. Then, view the task as a challenge. View performance of the task from the perspective of a compulsory challenge you have to perform and succeed it to achieve something. View it as a hurdle that you have to cross and think of the reward that is promised to you if or when you cross it. This would act as a major motivator for you to achieve the task. Another helpful tip is to understand whether the task leads to the accomplishment of larger objectives. If performing the task means that you can achieve more in the future with regard to the company's objectives, then go ahead with it, because ultimately, the company's growth and success matter to you because it would lead to your own personal growth and success.
Even if I manage to somehow use these to make myself enthusiastic, I believe the workdays get so lethargic that there's a bit of fullness by the end of the day or by the end of the week. So when the job gets monotonous and draining, will these steps help me again?
If you are new on the job or seeking a promotion, it is important to show enthusiasm. Leaders and co-workers want to work with someone motivated to fulfill an array of projects and responsibilities. Sometimes it can be draining to maintain enthusiasm throughout the workday, particularly if your work is stressful or if you have to multitask often. It is easier to build enthusiasm into work habits, so being cheerful on the job would become our second nature. With practice, it would not be so exhausting to show enthusiasm for work. To do this, there are several other things you can try. You can convince your superiors about your pleasant demeanor. You should be enthusiastic whenever your boss is around, plan to be well prepared, full of ideas and cheerful about current tasks and upcoming projects. Bring your smile and enthusiasm to one-on-one meetings with the boss, team meetings, presentations to clients, professional development seminars, networking events, fundraisers and any other venues where the boss will observe your professional behavior and representation of the organization. Take on more projects. Showing enthusiasm involves more than just sharing a cheerful disposition. You can be more of an asset to your boss and colleagues by exhibiting a willingness to take on more projects. This requires you to be efficient at your ongoing duties and open to new things. When you volunteer to help a colleague with a project or take the lead yourself, you could be challenged to perform tasks or prepare information beyond your range of experience. Do not go back to the customary methods of work when the pressure of performing well on a task builds up. It is important to stretch yourself and seek advice from others in the organization. Show genuine interest in your work because enthusiasm also entails demonstrating interest in your day-to-day tasks. For example, you can describe your job tasks with interest when training a new employee, and you can offer tips for getting the job done more efficiently to others performing the same task. Offer suggestions to the boss to streamline work processes in your department and propose new projects that will motivate the team to increase its collective performance. Use positive language in email communications to your boss, colleagues and customers. Anywhere that you show negativity, such as in an email or a workplace lunch, would create doubt about the sincerity of your enthusiasm in other areas of work. You can also show more enthusiasm by developing hobbies. For example, you can develop skills in web design and take on small projects to keep your creativity. This satisfaction will make your regular work more pleasant. Also, you can find ways to bring hobbies to the workplace for the benefit of the organization. For example, if you have honed your web design talents moonlighting as a web designer, you can offer assistance to the boss or a manager of another department when you become aware of a need for your skills. Remember to balance what you promise to other people with attention to your regular duties.
Those are some pretty helpful tips. I'm definitely going to try to put them to use when I feel exhausted by work. The one about developing hobbies especially made me stop and think. We're normally encouraged to focus on work, but for the first time I have been told to inculcate my hobbies in my work itself. Thank you, Professor.
Oh, you are welcome. Work can be made interesting if you really want it to. Now, let us talk about improvement in writing as a skill to allow effective reading. Good writing is not intrinsic in nature, it is based on deep reading and understandability of complex source material. This is the reason as to why improvement in writing skills can contribute to an increase in reading comprehension skills. To do this, write about the texts you read. Comprehension of science, social studies, and language art texts improve when you write about what you read, specifically when you respond to a text in writing. Writing personal reactions, analyzing and interpreting the text, writing summaries and notes about a text, and answering questions can help you understand the process of writing. Writing paragraphs improves sentence construction skills and reading comprehension. In this process, you learn spelling and improve your reading fluency.
So, does the increased frequency of writing actually improve our writing skills?
I believe it will. The more you write, the more ideas you will get. When you read what you have written, you will be able to see where you can improve, where you need to work. All this makes it easier for you to write better in the future.
Professor, if I may interject here, I'd like to ask the audience a few questions about everything we have covered.
Please go ahead.
The question is as follows.